Welcome to the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of Workology.
April is Workplace Conflict Awareness Month. Unresolved conflicts among teams result in loss of productivity, create barriers to cooperation and collaboration. I'm sure that most of us have been involved in some sort of conflict, whether it's personal or professional, and we have just encountered and really understand those kind of roadblocks that we might face. Conflict resolution skills and training are not just good for peacemaking. They're a great way to also drive employee retention. And today I'm with Stephen Hike. He's the president and chief executive peacemaker of Million Peacemakers. He's the co-author of a new book, The NonFlick, The Art of Everyday Peacemaking. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Great being here.
Is there anything else you'd like to share more about you and your background as it relates to our topic today?
Sure. So I've got about 30 years of experience in private and public companies in 3 different industries. I've served on the board and chair of industry association boards and quite active in a group called the Young Presidents Organization, where I chaired the chapter in Quebec and then chaired education for Canada and then chaired education for the world for this group of CEOs that are in about 120 countries that represent about $6.5 trillion of sales amongst them. So I have a fair amount of experience in dealing with education and learning, because the mission of that group is lifelong learning through education idea exchange.
So today's podcast episode is titled How to Drive Conflict or Conflict Resolution or NonFlick in the Workplace. So let's talk about NonFlick. What is that exactly, and how is that different from conflict?
Well, it's the exact opposite. There was no word for a resolved conflict that we could find, so we created one. NonFlick, and we felt that it represented what we were looking for, which was a simple but logical way of dealing with conflict that anyone at all levels of any organization could use and find applicable right after they learn it. And given there was no word for it, we made one up.
How does workplace conflict impact employee retention and productivity?
Well, as we all know, when we're experiencing conflict at work, we're not happy, we're stressed, and there have been surveys on this topic where we have about 2.5 hours every week on average an employee spends on conflict. So that's about 1 day a month just dealing with conflict, and that's the average. Sometimes it's higher than that. In the US alone, that translates into 385 million working days spent every year as a result of conflict in the workplace. It's very costly.
That's a big number. That is a huge number.
It is a huge number. And we all know that just intuitively, when we're spending time in conflict, we're not fulfilling the mission or vision of our organization, right? We're dealing with issues. And there's a good reason for it, because most of us are not trained in conflict resolution.
Well, and you think about it in terms of maybe you're interested in establishing or creating a conflict resolution training program in your workplace, or explaining to your CEO or your executive team why this would be important. You have that number, 2.5 hours a week that's spent in a stressful conflict situation that is driving unproductivity for yourself, and then on a larger scale for everyone in your organization.
Yeah.
What are some ways that companies can establish a conflict resolution culture in their workplace?
Well, culture typically comes from the top. We know that if the CEO is not on board, and often with the motivation or the education given to him or her by the head of HR, if they're not on board, then you're not going to change the culture. So I think, first of all, the CEO has to be comfortable and aware of the cost of avoiding conflict or a poorly resolved conflict. I know when I give this workshop to CEOs, out of 100 hands, 99 went up, 99 out of 100 went up to say they are not comfortable in dealing with conflict. And if the CEO has had the power to hire or fire, is not comfortable dealing with conflict today, then it's less likely then that the rest of the staff will be comfortable in dealing with conflict. So first you have to educate the CEO on the benefits of having a conflict resolution culture and training. And often that CEO will have to be trained him or herself. So the culture, again, starts at the top and I think would then cascade down, and with the support of a trained and educated HR professional, that goes a long way.
Certainly, and especially in our roles, I feel like we deal with a variety of situations. Often in human resources, we can be the bearer of bad news, or I like to think of us as sort of a reality check for the business, and having that conflict resolution experience can really help us, I think, immediately in those types of situations and scenarios.
Mm-hmm. And it could help the organization grow, because a well-resolved conflict, adds to people learning about each other and finding how they could benefit from each other's experiences in a positive way rather than a negative way. We look at the commonality that we share rather than the differences that we have.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today, we're talking about all things conflict resolution in the workplace and steps for success. I'm here with workplace conflict expert, Stephen Height. You can connect with Stephen on LinkedIn, and if you just search in his name, we'll also connect you with his LinkedIn address that I'll have listed on the transcript of this podcast. So you're talking about training programs and focusing on commonalities versus differences. How is a workplace conflict resolution training program different than, say, a Strengths Finder or a DISC program where we're looking at personality profiles?
Mm-hmm. Personality differences are one source of conflict. You might have a conflict of personality, a conflict of interest, a conflict of identity. So there are different sources of conflict, of which personality is just one of them. And then what we do is we want to understand ourselves in at least what we do with the NonFlick training, which is a very efficient, it's a 3-hour training that we've done. So we first, actually, even before we even get into how to deal with or resolve conflict, we teach how people could be better listeners, and we teach active listening and effective listening, where we make eye contact, we take some deep breaths to relax, and we practice listening with our head and our heart. So that's an important part even before you get into the conflict, just to know how to listen to each other. Then we would look at why you might have the style you do in resolving conflict, which is often impacted by our styles that we were exposed to growing up by our parents or mentors. So if our parents avoided conflict, we might be more likely to avoid conflict. If they dealt with force or power, do it or else I'm going to hit you, we might be more likely to use force or power in dealing with conflict. So just being aware of why we might deal with conflict and why other people might deal with conflict the way they do is very, very important. And only then do we get into the model, which is what we call the NonFlipped way, which has 3 steps and a number of questions that could fit on the back of a business card that anyone could carry with them. So the first step would be to understand ourselves and the other, then understand our shared reality, and finally to co-create. In those steps, we could resolve any conflict that we have, either internally or externally, at work and even at home.
It seems really simple. I mean, what is involved in a corporate or a formal corporate conflict resolution training program? Is it just 3 hours and then you're fixed, or what's the investment that's involved as you're working with these companies?
That's a great question. So people have to practice the new skill. Yes, 3 hours and you'll have the skills, and you will have resolved a real life conflict that you're having, because it's done through experiential learning. It's not a talking head. And we would potentially either have someone, a certified NonFlick coach, go to an organization, or we would train the HR professional, if that's what the organization wanted, to be the trainer of this training. So it would be about 3 hours, and then the backup ongoing coach would be the HR professional, usually in an organization, so that they could reinforce the learning as people want to practice it more and more and get more comfortable with it.
Can you talk a little bit more about your company, Million Peacemakers, and walk us through what you guys are about and what you do?
Sure. So Million Peacemakers is a nonprofit organization I started in 2014 along with my co-author, Dr. Amir Kafir, who created the NonFlipped Way, and another person, Frederick Latreille. And we have a really nice board of advisors of people that are active and get together each 2 weeks to further our mission, which is to empower people to transform conflict into non-flict. And through training, education, and partnerships, we're actually working toward 1 million peacemakers, co-creating a culture of peace in the world. And we've done training already of about 120,000 people, including about 100,000 women in one province of India. We've trained CEOs around the world, different companies. We had Danone Spain as one of the clients, who have now asked to translate the book into Spanish and have done so because they initially trained their top management and now they wanted to cascade throughout their organization. So Million Peacemakers is the vehicle to share the NonFlick way around the world.
What are some hidden benefits to NonFlipped that our listeners might not have considered?
Once you have the skill to resolve conflict, you're going to find that you could apply it with any kind of conflict, including conflicts that we have at home. And we know that when we have conflict at home, we're impacted when we come to work. We're not robots. We like to think we could compartmentalize, too many syllables in that one, compartmentalize our lives. But in reality, having gone through personally 2 divorces in the past, because I wasn't that great at conflict resolution until I learned a lot more about it, we are impacted when we get to work. And given the high rate of conflicts that people have in their personal life with a 50% plus divorce rate, we know that if we could be better at resolving conflict at home, we're going to have happier employees at work who are more effective and have skills that are transferable throughout their lives. So that would be one hidden benefit of doing this training at work.
I definitely am there with you. The personal benefit that's going to translate into the professional workplace that a lot of people really don't consider, because if you're having stress or you're going through a challenge in your personal life, it is going to absolutely impact your work performance and certainly the relationships and conversations that you have within your organization.
Mm-hmm. I know that I could tell you a story. I got an email from one of the CEOs who took the training, and 6 months later he wrote me saying that if he hadn't had that training when he did, he was going to have a strike for sure in his company. He was going with an attitude of, it's my company, I started it, it was my investment, who are you, the employees, to tell me what to do? And for sure with that attitude, he was going to have a strike with his union. But instead, he did put himself in their shoes and realized that perhaps they did have a point, and if they were being treated the way or talked to the way he was talking to them, he might have gone on strike too if he was an employee. So that was really helpful. But he didn't write me then. He wrote me 6 months later when his teenage daughter and wife were having a big conflict in the car, and there was swearing and screaming going back and forth. He pulled over his car. He took out the NonFlipped card that we gave at the end of the training, and he went through these steps. And by the time he got to one of the questions, which is, what could you appreciate about the other person that you're in conflict with? That his daughter realized that she had a mother who loved her and cared about her and was spending time with her, and that was something that not all the mothers of her friends really did as much. And she burst out into tears, and that resolved that conflict. So the hidden benefit you talk to is better relationships at home, better at work, and we're just more effective in communication, and we're happier.
I feel like NonFlipped might be the essential book that all parents must have on their person with them and at all times to be able to handle teenage drama, situations with spouse and family members, as well as in the workplace.
I agree. It's come in handy. I've got 7 millennials at home and abroad, and And it's been really good in understanding also how to embrace that generation, be it at work. I've got a number on my team, and as parents.
Well, it's perfect because I'm doing a podcast series that we just kicked off earlier this month on the 5 generations at work, and talking about how we can all work better together through understanding and conversation and communication. And NonFlick sounds like a great way to help make just better communication and working together happen.
We're talking the same language, Jessica.
Awesome. Well, I feel like I'm going to add this to our 5 generations at work hashtag. So if you're on Twitter, it's just hashtag 5genwork, and I'll put it out there as well. Sounds like a great resource that parents and coworkers and friends and leaders, organizational leaders, should be picking up and considering as they're trying to better understand, collaborate, and work together with all types of individuals, not just millennials or boomers, but everyone from every circumstance.
Awesome.
Where can listeners go to learn more about you?
We have a website, millionpeacemakers.org or nonflick.org, where it's just to learn more about the book. And they could email me at shecht@millionpeacemakers.org if they want to contact me directly.
Awesome. Well, it's not very often that we get email addresses of folks. So send them over an email, pick up a copy of the book, and let him know and let the team know how NonFlipped is changing your life. I will be picking up a copy for myself, because who doesn't want to learn how to communicate and work together and live together better with those who are around you? Thanks for joining the WORKOLOGY podcast, hosted by me, Jessica Miller-Merrill, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all our previous WORKOLOGY podcast episodes. If you go to the podcast episode page, we'll have a list of resources as well as links to NonFlick, the art of everyday peacemaking, and also to Stephen's LinkedIn. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you so much.
Production services for the WORKOLOGY podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill, provided by TotalPicture.com.